Welcome back to Recovering from Everything, a podcast for everyone who has ever had anything happen to them ever. I'm Kinga. I'm your host. You know me by now. We're old friends. You know a shit ton about me that I immediately regret every time I hit publish. And yet, here we are 2 years into the podcast, still hitting publish. Anyway, this week's topic kind of broke down my door in a kind of way. It just kept coming up this week. And I don't know what's going on with the sun, the moon, the stars, but there's all these kind of like weird synchronicities happening this week that are super cool. I love that stuff. Very comforting. But I've definitely felt a push to cover this topic and kind of what it might mean for you, for me, for your friends, for your drinking, and for any kind of behavior that you're doing work to not do anymore. So a behavior that you're like actively working away from, a behavior that you are working hard to or have worked hard to remove it from consistently showing up in your like day-to-day life. So we're going to talk about a word that I hate because it is so stupid. And I'll share about why I hate it so much. Obviously, I'll have a little rant, but I will use this word throughout simply because it's the quickest, easiest way for all of us to be on the same page. For the purposes of this podcast, I will use this word throughout, knowing that I don't mean what this word typically implies, but because we all, as a society, have sort of agreed on its general meaning, I will use it, and that word is relapse. Relapse mode, the stages of relapse. Sometimes people call it that. What does that mean? What does that look like? How do I prevent it? I know that I obviously work with women who want to change their drinking. And so it's very easy to, when you're quitting substances or have quit a substance, using that substance again would typically be qualified as a relapse. I fucking hate that word. But there are other behaviors, and I'll share some of mine with you because, I like to get raw, like to get vulnerable, like to really expose the darkness that lurks beneath. But yeah, so there are behaviors that you can do a ton of work to move away from or to eliminate them from consistently showing up in your day. And, one day you find yourself engaging in that behavior again. And so that, for all intents and purposes would be a relapse. So for me, you might know this already, you might not, but I identify or have identified in the past as anxiously attached. So if you know anything about attachment theory, or even if you don't, maybe just Google it. But attachment theory basically categorizes you as a certain type of attachment style, the way that I attach to people. And mine is anxiously attached. And so my anxious attachment, before I knew what that was, and before I did years of practice to change my attachment style into being more securely attached, I was just kind of, aimlessly in the dark, feeling super freaking panicked about all my relationships. all the time. Certain types of friendships, certain types of romantic relationships, my relationship with my mom, especially. Um, so I've done a ton of work, as I said, a ton of work to shift my attachment style, but I occasionally will have anxious attachment relapses where I will just be in an absolute panic internally. Sometimes it manifests externally, and I, take a couple hostages. But typically, I am securely attached now, and it comes with a certain level of no fucks given that I'm quite enjoying. So another way that I will sometimes relapse, and this is another thing I've done a lot of work to not let it show up and manifest itself in ways that were very consistent to me in the past, is my anger. So expressing my anger differently, kind of sorting through my anger in a really different way. Before I started doing this work, it was just like, well, I'm angry because you're a fucking idiot, and that's that. But I do a ton of stuff now. I also know that anger is a number one symptom for a traumatized person, and so I know a little better to address the trauma rather than the symptoms of the trauma. Right, the idea of truly healing it versus like sticking a band-aid over it. It reminds me always of, and this is like so crass, but like it's also such a perfect example. I think it's like Big Daddy, where I guess there was like a peeing on the ground situation, and they were just putting like newspapers on top of it to cover up the pee. This kid was like peeing everywhere. I think I only saw that movie once, maybe, and that's like the thing I took away from it. But it's kind of the same thing. So we can either clean up the pee or we can put newspapers on top of it. So I'd rather clean up the pee, I suppose. And occasionally, there someone still pees on my floor, and that someone is me. And wow, I did not see the podcast going in that direction, but that's what I get for being spontaneous. Let me tell you about why I hate the word relapse, because it is so stupid. Should I turn on a light? Is that better? I don't know. I don't know. We'll just keep it. Okay. So, for the record, if I haven't made it clear, I hate the word relapse because, one, there's such a quality, there's such a like punitive quality about it, where, I feel like if relapse were like an action, some sort of like figurine or something, it would be like a wagging finger, like you've relapsed. Blah! Um, there's no like, I don't really get a sense of like gray area, right? It's either like you relapsed or you didn't. And it's like one of those words that like people use almost like blindly, like not a lot of people have kind of dug into what a relapse means for them personally in their situation. I feel like I should asterisk this with, I um I've like adjusted the definition of relapse in my head so that I am comfortable using that word with myself, like an anger relapse or an anxious attachment relapse. I haven't had a substance use relapse. I'll tell you about the hilarious time that I like almost relapsed. Actually, there's two times I like almost relapsed. One was by accident. One was because of everything that I'm about to share about the symptoms of that you are in relapse mode. So don't let me forget. Remind me, and if I do forget, tell me in the comments that I forgot, and I will type it out for you. Um, So there, in my definition of relapse, there is a lot of like gray areas. It's not you either relapsed or you didn't, and relapsing is bad. I kind of look at it as like accidentally doing research, and the accidentally part even is like arguable because as you'll see as this episode progresses, there's like a lot of signs and symptoms that you are in relapse mode. So, yeah, accidentally doing research, and we draw a lot of conclusions from research. So, typically, when we're doing research with substances or with any kind of behavior that we have worked very hard to eliminate from our consistent day to day life, the research shows that, yep, it sucks, and we made a great decision doing the work to eliminate it. So, doing research. And that's not an attempt to sort of like minimize the experience that people have during like a relapse, but I think when it is labeled that way by a person who hasn't actually thought of what their definition of relapse is, it can feel very, very, very heavy. It can feel like lashings, like you need to like atone now or something, where uh, it's a much more pleasant feeling when you can kind of observe, you know, your sort of part in it, the time leading up to the relapse, what you liked and didn't like, and kind of be like, yeah, it's not for me. I tried it again and it's really not for me, you know? So if you need a label, if you're going to label your stuff, relapse is a very easy label to like incorporate. Because again, like I said, everyone knows what you're talking about. You reverted back to a behavior that you had been working really hard not to do. If you need a label, relapse is a great word. But before you apply it to yourself, I would definitely kind of try to figure out what your definition is of that. And like I said, I'm very comfortable with the word. I'm comfortable labeling my, behaviors as relapses, but I also have kind of like a lighter sort of attitude about it. So, not that, I mean, an anxious attachment relapse is like a light time, not at all. Same with like relapsing on my anger, not a great time, really incredibly ugly and hard and guilt ridden. And like, I need to do so much damage control after, both with other people, but also with myself, because I really really fucking hate myself. And it's a lot of like, oh my God, how did I get here again? I'm can I actually change? Like, is change even really possible for me? Do people change? And it's like this whole it's a whole thing. So, the experience itself is pretty fucking terrible, but the coming out of it, I'm fine with using something like relapse because I know like, all right, I gotta do a little bit of assessment here and give Kinga a little bit of attention because it seems I've been ignoring her and she acted out to get my attention. So anyways, just a grain of salt if you're going to insist on using that word. And even something like someone relapsing on alcohol or on a substance. I was just chatting with my friend about this the other day, but what qualifies as a relapse, right? Like the internet, it's like lapse or relapse, and a lapse is like a one-off, and a relapse is a you're in it and 3 weeks have gone by, or whatever. So figure that out for yourself, if you are gonna want to use that word for yourself. Otherwise, highly recommend calling it doing research. So I picture kind of like the journey of recovering from anything as sort of like walking on this like one path, and you're trudging even, because recovery work is not easy, and it does feel like trudging, and you're wearing, big like hip waders, and you're walking through the mud. And you're just, there's some easier moments, and maybe like the sun is nice and bright that day, and there's like a nice cool breeze, and you got a canteen full of water, and like a lot of it, things are actually like really good. But you're still trudging, right? You're still trudging, and you're waiting for the mud to dry up, and you're like, it's been weeks, it's been months, it's sometimes been years. When's the damn mud gonna dry up? And you're trudging and you're trudging, and you look behind you and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that path. Should I try that path again? It might be easier this time. It might not have been as difficult as I maybe made it out to be when I switched over to this path. And you like look behind you and you're like, I'm going to just take a step in that direction. And maybe you take a couple of steps in that direction. And then maybe you trip and you fall over. And maybe it takes you a minute to stand back up, and you kind of, dust yourself off, and you're like, oh no, yeah, this path still really sucks. I don't want to fall. I'd much rather be trudging than falling. And so you know, face towards your path again, and you keep going. That's sort of how I picture a relapse, is for whatever reason, and for many reasons, you stepped off the path that you were on, and you tried the old thing, and you did the research, you got your conclusions. The old thing, not that great. Really sucks. This new thing kind of sucks right now, but it doesn't always suck. And I'd rather like a little bit of suck than like a lot of suck. I mean, that was probably the most brilliant, wise, genius thing I've ever said. I'd rather a little bit of suck than a lot of suck. This podcast is out of control. It's been out of control. Oh, there's one of my dogs. Anyway, relapse is a process with like kind of a bunch of different stages. And so if you can think about a behavior that you've been trying to change, maybe it's communicate better, maybe it's the way that you handle your anger better or communicate your anger better, quitting drugs and alcohol, setting better boundaries for yourself. Maybe you've been trying to say yes less, and maybe you've been trying to say no more, right? Because maybe you're like really friggin' exhausted. So, whatever it is that you have been intentionally working away from, a behavior that started to really suck for you, a relapse is simply resorting back to that behavior. And again, this is a behavior that no longer consistently exists in your day. It no longer consistently consumes you. It no longer consistently directs your thinking, directs your behavior. It no longer consistently exists in your life. The relapse actually begins like days, weeks, or months before the actual act happens. The same way that, substance use is progressive, a relapse is also a progressive behavior, which sounds scary, but that's actually the good news, is because it's progressive, because it starts days, weeks, months before the actual action. There are a ton of moments where, if you do the work that needs to be done, like right now with me today, you can look back, you can identify all of those moments where things could have shifted for you, where you could have shifted things for you. There's all these moments where in that time, you didn't know that you had power to change things for yourself. You didn't know. Why would you have known? But you will know now. Um, and you are actually incredibly powerful. And so it becomes less of this, like I got kind of carried away by the tide of something, and more of a, oh, I could have dropped an anchor there. I could have dropped an anchor there. I could have dropped an anchor there. Your thoughts and your feelings aren't a relapse, but if you ignore or avoid or mismanage or not manage thoughts and feelings for long enough, Molly, you in danger, girl. Here's the exercise. I could honestly talk about this for eons, but we're gonna just do the exercise in the interest of time. And this is something that you can journal for yourself. Think of a time recently or in the past where you were surprised by a behavior that occurred for you, where you were like, how the fuck did that happen? Because I've been working really hard not to do that. How the fuck did that happen? Maybe you overdrank. Maybe you released anger in a big way. Maybe you stopped communicating in a specific way. Maybe you, oopsies, forgot to do your taxes or something. Okay. Um, and it's a type of behavior that you have been doing work to not do as consistently anymore. So, maybe you've been doing your month ends or whatever. I got to do mine. Honestly, it's only August and I'm already freaking out about tax season, which is in like 8 months. Anyways, okay. So think of a behavior recently or in the past that you have actively worked to get away from. And then it showed up one day and you were like, how the fuck did that just happen though? I don't know where it came from. I'm so surprised. So write that down. Most recently, the behavior that surprised me was blank. Okay, next. When I think about the couple of days leading up to it, I can identify that I felt blank, blank. And this could be things like I could identify that I felt angry, right? Obvious emotion. I can identify that I felt sad, another obvious emotion. But sometimes you just feel off. And I feel like off should just be on the feelings wheel. But it could be that the 2 days, the few days leading up to the relapse, I just felt off. Next one. If I really think about it, I had been feeling blank for X amount of days or weeks. So if you did decide to use the word, I've been feeling off, try to identify the feelings leading into you feeling off. What were they? Rejected, abandoned, betrayed, happy. Feeling consistently too happy is a major trigger for many of us. The people like me who I've always fucked it up somehow, and so I'm like always waiting for the bottom to fall out. Oh, my nervous system, it was a mess. It was a mess for ages. Sometimes still, okay, sometimes still, I will relapse on a sense of impending doom because I think I am such a fuck up. Okay, so if I really think about it, I had been feeling XYZ for days or weeks. If I think about it even further, I had stopped doing X and started doing Y. I started thinking I blank. So, what this might sound like is I'd stopped journaling in the morning and I started cruising Instagram instead. I started thinking I was not nearly good enough, talented enough, beautiful enough, funny enough compared to all the people that I was seeing first thing in the morning. And it doesn't have to be I stopped doing. It could also be like a thought or a feeling. So I had stopped enjoying my own company, and I had started seeking constant distractions. I started thinking I never had any downtime. I started thinking I didn't want to be left alone with my own thoughts. I started thinking I wasn't actually great company and these people were only hanging out with me because they felt sorry for me. Know what I mean? Okay. All right, here's where it gets kind of cool. Well, cool for not the person experiencing it. Okay. I remember the first time I started thinking this way, it was blank. So if we're going to take the example I just used, I remember the first time I started thinking that people didn't really like me. They were only hanging out with me because they felt sorry for me. It was in grade 6 when everyone got invited to a girl's birthday party, and she brought the invitation for me a day later than everyone else, and I knew that her mom had made her invite me too. Whatever your first time experiencing that feeling, that thought about yourself was, identify that. Okay. Then you're going to tell yourself this. And if you're journaling, you're going to write this down in your little journal. I now know that old programming was coming into play, and my relapse had very little to do with the current state of my life. We have traced your relapse back, the days and the weeks before. Shit, we even went back to childhood. So there's still stuff coming up that is so deeply embedded in you that finds a way to come to the surface and sort of run your life like a bizarre little puppet master. What we're going to do now is we're going to take our power back. And this is, this is the powerful portion of this exercise. So, at this point, you might be like, oh, wow, I'm so hopeless. I'm so powerless. There's like memories from my childhood still running the show. Like, Kinga, are you crazy? I'm not crazy. It's called psychology, motherfucker. Look it up. But the power portion of the podcast is, this is what you're going to do. Write this down. In hindsight, I could have changed my thoughts or behaviors at these specific points. So, whatever that looks like in your life, if you were too busy for too long, too distracted, and you got very stressed out and very overwhelmed, and you were spread very thin, at what point could you have dropped a couple of anchors to be like, oof, I need to pause. I need to like just chill here for a minute before I tackle the next thing or take on another thing. If yours was more like self-esteem related, you know, uh, people don't actually even really like me. Maybe at some point you were invited out to do something, but you were so far into that shit that you were like, no, like I'm not even going to return this text. Like this isn't even real. Maybe you could list out a couple of people that you feel like actually do like you, like really love you. And like maybe it's like your mom or something, and go spend time with them to get that feeling of like what being loved really feels like, for you to be like, oh, right, I like this feeling and I don't need to like constantly convince myself that I'm like not allowed to have this feeling, because it's much nicer to stay in this feeling than to not. So in hindsight, I could have changed my thoughts or behaviors at these specific points. Instead, I could have blank. And in the future, I will blank. make a commitment to yourself. Okay. So that even when you are starting to like emotionally relapse, uh, you have this random journal entry from a random podcast that you listen to one day to be like, wait, I remember Kinga told me to do this, to write this down. You have the answers there, right? No thinking required. You have an answer that you have written down on this day, today, August, whatever day it is, 2024, as a reference point. You have it. It's right there for you. Keep yourself safe, sis. Now, reflect. I wish we could reflect together. I reflected on this with my clients today when I did this exercise with them, and it was so beautiful. And I wish I could reflect with all of you, viewers and listeners. So if you want to leave a comment somewhere, I would love your reflection so much. But reflect. How did this refine or enlighten your thinking about yourself? How was this helpful to you? Even if of all the things I said, most of it just went whoosh, just, in one ear, out the other. Was there something in here that you can hold on to, that resonated, echoed through your body? What's the thing that is helping to refine, so narrow down, limit your thinking on what the concept of relapse even means, or what was it that helped enlighten it, so to like expand your definition of what actually goes into a relapse? Because it's not freaking black and white, right? Like, as we sort of deduced here with this work, there's a kind of like emotional relapse that occurs way, way before the actual like physical manifestation. So I have to feel shitty for long enough before I let crazy words come out of my mouth, at you or whatever. I have to feel shitty long enough and avoid it and ignore it and not manage it and mismanage it for so long, with all these different stories and beliefs that for some reason I'm convinced are facts, rattling through my noodle, for so long before I pick up a drink or before I pick up a drug, which means that there is a long time where I am very powerful to stop that train. So I hope that's helpful. Relapse mode. It is not what you think. It's not black and white. It's not out of the blue. There's a lot of different moments for you to snatch your power back. Thank you for listening to another episode of Recovering from Everything, a podcast for everyone who has ever had anything happen to them ever, including changing the definition of relapse to one that's a little more forgiving, compassionate, and actually makes sense for their lives. Love you. See you soon.